Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. My name is Cornell Verdeja-Woodson, and I am the founder and CEO of Brave Trainings LLC, which is a diversity consulting firm which works with organizations to help them understand and unpack the social diversity issues that impact their organizations as well as our society, and to begin thinking about ways to be a part of the movement towards equitable change. This is the Let's Unpack That discussion series. This series began as a podcast a while ago that I only did like 5 episodes for because I got overwhelmed and stopped. And then I decided, you know what, let's pick this thing back up and let's turn it into a webinar series. And so today we're having a conversation amongst Black men and non-binary individuals around what we're seeing today and what's happening in terms of racism, police brutality, the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on Black and brown bodies, and how we begin to unpack the history that is connected to these issues, and also how we begin to move towards a path to liberation that is steeped in intersectionality. I am joined here by some of my favorite people. Sean, we met, but you are now one of my favorite people. Christopher Griffin, Blake Adams, Dr. Maurice Shirley, Jeffrey Pereira. I always get your last name wrong. I know I butchered it, but you're going to introduce yourself in a second, and Sean Coleman. So let's get started with everyone going around, starting with Chris. Your name, your affirming pronouns, and one word to describe how you're feeling in this moment.
One word? Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Christopher Griffin. I use he, she, and they pronoun. And you said one word?
One word to describe how you're feeling right now.
Oh, child.
This was in the pre-work that I sent you, so you should.
I know. I feel complex. There we go.
Okay, I like that. All right.
That includes a lot of things.
Awesome. Blake?
Hi, everyone. My name is Blake Adams. My pronouns are he, him. One word I will say is hopeful.
Nice. Dr. Maurice Shirley?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maurice Shirley. My pronouns are he, him, his. And the one word that describes how I'm feeling is tired.
Jeff?
Hey, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Pereira. There you go. My pronouns are he, him, and one word to describe how I'm feeling right now is skeptical.
Okay. All right. And Sean?
I'm Sean Coleman, he, him, his, and I am hopeful.
Hopeful. Nice. My word would be tired as well. It's been a long week. So let's dive right in. The first question that I wanted to ask you all is sort of what has been going through your mind as you witness what is happening in our country right now? What's coming up for you? What are your thoughts? What is top of mind right now for you? And we can popcorn it. Anyone can go.
So I'm happy to take a crack at it. So my word right now in the moment is hopeful. I think there's definitely been a cycle of emotions over the past several months, starting with COVID, and then it's really, taken some big hits from there. But I would say there was anger. I would say there was sadness. There was hurt. And I think, the recent groundswell of activity and support and action from a coalition of folks that include, Black people, Latinx people, white people, I think has given me some hope. So I hear some of the other people that are, some other panelists that have some reservations because, one of the big questions I have is how sustainable will this be? But, I'm hopeful of what I've seen thus far.
Nice.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I'll sort of expound on that skeptical a little bit. I think just what Blake was getting at there is the big question that I ask myself again is, how sustainable is this? And I think the other piece of that is how real is this? I think of the time that we're in, coastal cities everywhere, people are quarantined, you can't get out, stores aren't open, restaurants aren't open, there's nothing else to do, there's no other distraction. Once we open right back up, you know, who stays, who goes, what does this movement look like? You know, because I mean, I feel like we saw some of these similar things back in Ferguson and back in Baltimore, but it really looked just like us because everyone else had somewhere to be. So, you know, does everybody else stay once they have somewhere to be? That's my big, the big emphasis behind my skepticism.
I'll jump in. I'm hopeful because discussions like this are happening, right? And oftentimes when we have discussions like this, Black trans voices are not at the table. So just the fact that we get an opportunity to engage in these discussions, I'm incredibly hopeful as to what the future is going to look like, right? And I'm a bit frustrated because even in the midst of a pandemic, on top of a pandemic, Black trans women are still being murdered, right? And I'm going to just speak her name. Dominique Fells was found murdered in Philadelphia, and not just murdered, but murdered, right? So I think at this point, we get an opportunity to kind of shift the narrative so that we can begin to kind of say what we want this movement to look like and who we want to make sure are included in these discussions and this movement, and making sure that we're holding folks accountable, right? I want folks to be just as angry that Dominique was murdered that they were that George Floyd was murdered. And I think that starts with us. So I'm hopeful that we're starting, and I'm here to do the work, and hopefully everyone else is too.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, Maurice?
Yeah, it's been a roller coaster of emotion, you know, to the point where, you know, there are some folks where it's like, oh, this is happening? Like, oh my goodness, they're waking up. And I'm like, girl, where the hell have you been, child? So I think that's been a frustration of mine. I'm just like, girl, this ain't nothing new. Like, police been killing us. Like, you know, so like, this ain't nothing new. And so I think that's where some of my frustration has been. And then there is some skepticism. I think that this whole pandemic has really, I think it has people shook. I think it has people shook. I think it has companies shook. And I think that there's a lot of financial fragility right now. And I think that, you know, I question the whole skepticism. It's like, how much is this real, and how much is you just trying to cover your ass so that you can continue to make money and profit off the lives of Black and brown folks? So that's what I've been wondering. So I don't know, I'm curious to see what it's going to be like after this. And I think another thing I've been thinking about is what are the multiple avenues in which we can engage in uplifting the voices of Black folks? So not only with protests, but what are the other highways or roads and pathways of resistance, whether that's sharing your joy or you know, protesting or storytelling or educating. And so, yeah, and I think that's a conversation I've been having, you know, with my friends that, you know, there are some folks that don't feel safe to protest. Like, as a non-binary individual who most people perceive as just like a feminine gay man, I don't necessarily feel safe out in the streets. And so, you know, I've had folks ask me like, why don't you protest? And I'm like, girl, because I don't feel safe. But I do know the ways that I can contribute to this. So don't ask me why I'm not protesting. Ask me how I'm contributing to this, and I can tell you, right? So, yeah, all those things, child.
Awesome. Maurice?
Yeah, and I'll just quickly go ahead and say that in terms of what's on my mind in these moments that we're living in today, is it's a lot of shock and disbelief for two very different reasons. So the first reason is that we've heard our grandparents, we've heard our parents talk about this, and you're starting to think like, oh, this is happening. What am I going to tell my children about what happened to me in these times? So the fact that this is happening from generation to generation, it is almost very shocking, and I can't believe that we're still doing this in 2020. 4 generations have been experiencing the same thing, same script, different cast. But I've also been in shock and disbelief because I've been very proud of how quickly we have mobilized, how quickly we've come together to get these conversations going, talking about change, and actually putting that into action and practice. So I thought when all this started transpiring, it wasn't going to go fast. I know it's going to go somewhere. I just didn't think it was going to go fast. In the matter of 2 weeks, almost 3 weeks now, people have come together and has brought community together to rally around this one critical issue. So I've been very shocked, surprised, and in a lot of disbelief for very different reasons.
You know, Maurice, you kind of, your theme of what you just said, it kind of matches what Blake and Sean were saying around hopefulness. I must admit, I don't always feel that hope, right? And I do this work every single day, and I see the good conversations happening. Here we are having a conversation right now. How do y'all find that hope? And I know this wasn't one of the questions, but how do you find that hope in the midst of all the ugly? And anyone, Blake, Sean, or Maurice?
Yeah, I can say, I do feel like the conversation has continued to progress. I mean, like 4 or 5 years ago, it was a matter of educating people on why all lives matter was a misdirected sentiment. I think at this point, everyone sort of gets that, Black people in particular have been brutalized, persecuted, sort of held down by systematic racists. And I think that conversation has changed from where it was 5 years ago to where it is today. And as Dr. Shirley mentioned, like even in the last couple of weeks, I feel like it's accelerated. Like one example of that is there's a lot of focus on police brutality. A month ago, the 8 Can Wait set of things you can do to sort of improve police accountability and responsibility in a short period of time within the existing sort of tenements of the police structure was sort of the leading ask from the movement. And I think even in the past 2 weeks, that's changed dramatically. So now we're talking about defunding the police. And I think the discussion is just really changing at a systematic level. Like, what do we view as sort of the rights, the needs, the accelerators of the Black community? So I think just the nature of the discussion has picked up quite quickly. And, my question just becomes, okay, what does this look like in a month? What does this look like in a year? What does this look like in November, most importantly? Mm-hmm. So I think like the tenor of the discussion is like accelerating. It's just like, my internal question is this thing going to burn out, or will this actually get us to a new stable sort of platform?
Yeah. Sean, you also mentioned hope as well.
But I'm also thinking that it feels a little different now, right? Not just because we're having this discussion around defunding the police, but because of the energy around the upcoming elections, right? Mm-hmm. And tying that energy and that momentum to keep folks active and to keep folks engaged and to make sure they understand why they should vote in this election, but also in local elections, right? And I think as long as we are continuing to have and shift the discussion into all of those intersectionalities and all of the intersections that are impacted by what's happening right now, we can continue moving it forward, which is why I'm hopeful. My fear is that there aren't enough of the right people at the table having these discussions, right? Again, I don't see many Black trans faces in these rooms, or non-binary faces in these rooms when they're having these discussions. So who actually gets an opportunity to lend voice to what's actually happening in our community? And Christopher, I think you hit on it, like spot on. I don't feel safe going out and protesting, right? So and not just because of the police. At times, it's my own community that will look at me and say, well, what are you doing here? And you don't belong here. And as if my Blackness is not enough for me to show up and give voice. So I think that has to happen, right? And it happens with us. And I don't want to put all the accountability on us, but I do want us to say that we have to begin pushing the envelope and having honest discussions. Like, let's stop making it sound like, okay, all Black lives matter when you kind of cherry pick who you want to advocate for. So like, that's the challenge. And it's making sure that while we're having this discussion, we're also having that discussion in-house amongst family, if you will, by saying, hey, okay, we're hurting our own in some ways. What are we going to do about that? And how do we bring voice to that? So hopeful, but still understanding that so much more work needs to be done.
Absolutely, absolutely. I want to take us to our next question, where, I feel like there are a lot of, at least personally, I have been fielding a lot of questions from people who are just waking up to this, like, what is going on? What is this about? What is this relationship between Black people and the police? And, I know that there's history to the relationship, if you will, between, law enforcement and Black people. can you speak to what is the catalyst for what we're seeing right now between this tumultuous relationship between law enforcement and the Black community? And anyone can pop in there.
I think what I would start with, Cornell, is first off, I don't believe it. You know, anybody who says I'm just waking up to this, get out of my face with that. Like, I think you just decided to do this, you know, because it seems right now in vogue to do this. So I will not accept anybody who looks me in the face and is like, I didn't know this was happening, or, you know, oh my God, this is real. Like that's absolute BS to me. But to address the question in terms of, you know, how do you articulate the catalyst for the relationship between Black men and law enforcement, I don't even know that you can answer that's a big question. You know, I think it goes all the way back to sort of just the birth of policing in this country, and you know, its origins are in basically holding people, you know, Black people, you know, in check. You know, so I think it's just expanded and expounded over time, and you know, maybe it's tempered its way back into ways where it feels a little more tolerable to people watching. But it's always been here. You know, I'm sure someone far more intelligent than me can answer a little bit better than that. But I struggle with the waking up to the reality piece. You know, it's hard for me to even get past that.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if there's really been like a catalyst, really, because I think this has always existed, right? So like, I think with the current situation that we are in, and with, you know, COVID-19 and, you know, folks going to social media as a way to connect, I think, you know, there are more eyes, you know, on, you know, the things that are being shared, right? So I think if there was a catalyst, you know, maybe it's this, you know, this virus, and yeah, I think folks are, you know, they're bored and they have more time and they're paying attention to things that they may not pay attention to, and so yeah.
I hear you.
I mean, I don't know if there's no, like, this shit has been happening since the beginning. So like, I mean, the birth of the police force was slave patrol. Like, the birth of the prison system was to, you know, police our bodies and jail us and profit off of our bodies. So like, you know, so like, it's always has existed. But I think, you know, this virus has put people in their damn homes, and now they're bored, and now they're looking on, you know, social media and looking at videos, and they're like, oh my goodness, like, police are killing Black people? What?
Yeah.
It's just like, girl. Yeah, so.
They're bored perfectly sums it up.
Exactly.
Go ahead, Maurice.
Also chime in here, but we did have a question saying they can't see us as speakers because your screen share is still up. So
Okay.
I think some people want to see the speakers as we speak.
Gotcha. Thanks for that.
Yeah, no problem. So what I would say is I agree with Chris and the other panelists. They are very bored, and social media has been a driving factor. But I think the power behind people seeing or forced to see these new images and videos and seeing what's happening is that, and I know where I come from. I was actually raised outside of Houston, Texas. And we used to think that it was just our community, right? But as soon as you step out of the community, you start seeing it happens to other communities across the nation and around the world. So I think now with social media and people seeing these images and forced to see them because we all are quarantined to a certain extent, they're starting to say, it's like, oh, it's not just my Black friend who's experiencing this. It's actually a lot of people. And then once you start dealing in magnitudes, I think people cannot ignore it any longer. So I think the catalyst as to why we're seeing this change and why it's moving so quickly is because people are forced to see it, and the magnitude of how many images, how many stories, once again, same script, just a different cast of characters is happening here. I think people have to wake up, take their blindfolds off. I don't know if they've been sleeping for years, if they just took a little cat nap, whatever you've done, I think people are just being forced to see what's in front of them.
I'll weigh in there a little bit and just add. I think one of the big parts of it is also just the murder of George Floyd specifically. Was on camera for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, and there was just something about the coldness and I think the lack of humanity in it that that has gotten a lot of folks that previously were ignorant to a lot of these killings that have happened, that we all acknowledge, that we all have been dealing with for a long time. I think there was something about it that flipped the switch for a lot of people. I was reading one article that basically said, 46% of Americans thought the Eric Garner's murder was racially related, whereas George Floyd's murder, 75% of Americans think that's racially related. And it's partially because I think the conversation and the sentiment of the country has changed, but I also think it's just the nature of that video and the way in which his life was extinguished. I think people are like, people that were ignorant previously, like, okay, there's actually something here. And it's too late for a lot of us, but I think that has driven some of the change.
Yeah, and that's really interesting to me, because I think for me, what makes this issue so insidious is that that's privilege, right? That you actually can navigate your life and never see how other people experience the world. And so to me, when I get that question of like, whoa, I didn't know this was, happening, and what is going on, and why, and finally realizing that it's due to racism, I think that is the ultimate display of privilege, because you've never had to recognize it as racism. And I think, Jeff, you brought up a really good piece of history around, I think it was about 1700s is when the first police force was created. And in the South, it was around slave patrols, as Chris mentioned, to literally police Black bodies and making sure that they stayed in line and didn't get out of line and things of that sort. And then we also had police force in Boston in the early 1700s as well that was formed too. But they've always been about protecting whiteness as well, and safeguarding white folks from Black people. So when you have this system that was born out of the intent to police Black bodies, what else can you expect from it? Right. This is the whole idea that you can't use the master's tools, I'm going to butcher that quote, but you know the quote I'm talking about. Right.
Cornell.
Yeah.
Cornell, Blake brought up a point that I've also struggled with through this, like something that I've seen a lot with people mentioning, like, seeing this video was so jarring, like I had to say something. And like, I struggle with that point too, because I've yet to watch any single second of the video. I've seen the still of Derek Chauvin on his knee on his neck. That's all I needed to see. And specifically, the reason that's all I needed to see is because I feel like I've seen a lot of videos of Black people murdered by the police. So I struggle with the idea that like we're waking up to this because we just saw this video. It's like I've seen videos of Black people murdered by the police all over Twitter. I've seen them all over Instagram. I've seen them on CNN. I know they've been on Fox. I mean, maybe not on Fox News. I've seen them on MSNBC. I've seen them everywhere. So it's hard for me to believe that anyone has been oblivious to this point because they haven't seen it yet. Like that's difficult for me.
Sean, you look like you wanted to chime in there.
Because I think it's also about them not being able to justify it now, right? Mm-hmm. Normally when it happens and they see it, when we see it, it's like, oh, well, he was resistant, or oh, well, he was committing a crime, or oh, he was doing this. He was absolutely like, there is no way any sane person can justify what happened. And I think that's the awakening, because now I can't justify it. Maybe it really is what they've been telling us it is. So I think that also, and to the point about what the police were actually put in place to do, I hear oftentimes folks will say, it's about protecting and serving. It's about protecting and serving. We always have known it was never about protecting and serving us, right? And that the system is broken. The system is broken. The system performs exactly as it's supposed to perform. So if we're going to talk about it, we have to have that discussion too. It's functioning like it was supposed to function. We need to dismantle it so that it functions correctly and it serves all people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I really want to make sure we get at, and what I must admit, the catalyst for me bringing us all together here was that I was really starting to get pissed off, quite frankly, at the lack of intersectionality that exists within the conversation. That most of the media attention and the activism, as Sean, as you mentioned before, and Chris, you as well, has been surrounded around cisgendered straight Black men. and right, absolutely, we should, not saying that, you know, we shouldn't focus on them at all, but we've forgotten Tony McDade, we forgot Nina Pop, we forgot, exactly, right? Like we forgot the other Black people that weren't cis and weren't straight, who were also have been impacted by violence, both from police and from our own community. And there has been this constant struggle for cisgender straight Black people to say their names, to acknowledge the added layer of oppression that Black, queer, and trans and non-binary people experience. So can we talk a little bit and get real about what is that? What is the inability to see the parallels to our struggles and join together towards real liberation? And anyone can start there.
Well, I'll say something. So I think, you know, intersectionality is messy, right? And I think that, and I mean, this has been happening for quite some time. I think, you know, the agenda to, you know, move the, you know, the Black community forward has always, so I'll give an example. So have anyone heard of Claudette Colvin?
Think so.
So Claudette Colvin was actually one of the first Black women to not decide to give up her seat on the bus, and she was dark skinned. She was 15, had a baby out of wedlock, and who did they choose? They chose Rosa Parks. I love her, yes, but light skinned, older woman, you know, fragile, you know. So I think there's like this image. We have Martin Luther King versus Malcolm X. Malcolm X was like by any means necessary. Martin Luther King was, you know, nonviolent. So I think that when we're trying to move forward, we're trying to go with this clean cut, easy to digest image of a Black person. And I think when we, you know, really dive into the intersectionality of it all, it gets messy, right? And I think folks have to accept that, right? There's going to be multiple conversations, right? And so, yeah, I'll leave it at that for now.
What you're getting at is respectability politics, right?
Yeah,
Our desire.
You know, particular image. I mean, you even have Bayard Rustin, who was pushed to the side, and no one talked about, you know, his sexuality or put him to the forefront because of his sexuality, right? So I think that, yeah, when you add layers to it, it gets messy, and it forces us to look at our own communities and our own struggles, right? And I think that folks bypass that to move forward in this, you know, this idea of progression. But it's like, girl, you're leaving so many folks behind. Yeah, so I'll leave it at that.
Other folks?
But I think it's also about toxic masculinity, right? And introducing homophobia and transphobia, and how that stigma exists, and how it's still okay to make homophobic or transphobic jokes and still not accept us, even when it comes to like basic human rights. So it's like, if I'm seen as embracing them, what does that say about me? And us having to have a larger conversation around transphobia and homophobia within our own communities.
I mean, I will also add, because I agree with Chris and Sean on this, but I'll also add, for some reason in society, we've, especially in the Black community, we've kind of placed these subpopulations as the hierarchy, right? Who needs it the most? And we've kind of put in the Black community, and I won't speak about the entire Black community, just on what I've seen, is that it's Black and then everything else. And adding anything else into this particular cause is distracting to what we want to accomplish. But as Chris said, we're leaving so many people behind that now we're only showing a very small percentage of the Black people that are being affected. So I think what we have to realize is that all these lives in the Black community need to be respected and they need to be advocated for. And leaving anyone behind is unacceptable at this point in time. And we just have to refuse to keep moving forward and being okay with leaving people in the wake of the tragedies.
Yeah, I think you bring up some real good history as well. I used to teach Introduction to Queer History at Ithaca College, and one of the parts of that history was the relationship between the Black community and the LGBTQIA community. The queer community was seen as a threat to the Black family, right? Again, respectability politics, that we're just like you politics, and that queerness was seen as thwarting that effort to show white folks that we're just like you, we're no different. I think the other thing to note, and I just lost it, but it was a good point. It'll come back to me later, but who else?
I think the only couple things that I might add in there, Cornell, are obviously respectability politics, and just as a quick aside, all you brothers out there protesting in your suits, I see you. They don't care about your suit, so like, come on now, it's not going to get us any further. Your suit is not a shield. One, and I'm someone who also wears suits. But right. The second piece is, I think the voices of our coastal cities tend to sort of shine the loudest, or come through the loudest. And we often forget just how conservative large pockets of our community is, once you start getting, in between the coasts. I mean, I honestly wholeheartedly believe that, Republicans could potentially have a larger percentage of the Black vote if they just weren't so damn racist. Because you have agreement on a lot of other pieces, as it relates to homophobia, transphobia, those sort of things. So I think that's where we really struggle.
Blake, anything to add there?
Yeah, no, I think I'm spot on. I mean, I plus one to everything I've heard. The only thing I'd add is, so I was listening to a recent, very, very popular Black podcaster, and he was talking about the recent movement of racial justice and discrimination, and basically said he was taken aback by other groups sort of trying to pile on, especially like LGBT community, and sort of detract from the progress that we were making as far as like systematic racism. And in my head, I'm just like, oh man, this is so frustrating. He just doesn't get it. And it takes me back to like the, Martin Luther King quote of, injustice anywhere prohibits justice everywhere. And it's like, now is the collective time where we can shine a light on all types of discrimination and prejudice. Like, it's not time to cherry pick. And it just feels like, now's the time to really open the discussion across the board. And, I totally think there's an opportunity to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that, women, both cis and trans, have been largely erased from this conversation as well. And coming up in about, I think, a week and a half, we're going to have a conversation just like this with a group of Black women discussing that topic too. So I didn't want to forget that. So in the spirit of moving forward, right? I love, like, how do we get here, but what do we do next? What kind of how do we have the conversation with our Black peers about the erasure of diverse Black voices and getting to that point where they're able to say Nina Pop, Tony McDade, and even what happened to Ayanna Dior in Minneapolis over a car accident, right? Where she was attacked by a group of Black cis men, and over a car accident it wasn't just a car accident, it was because she was trans. How do we begin to have that conversation and move forward and start changing hearts and minds? What are your thoughts around that? Sean, like, oh, I sent y'all these questions ahead of time. Now y'all had time to think about it.
I'll share a little bit. I mean, go ahead. Somebody else go.
No, please do. Go ahead.
No, I think that it all starts with like looking inward and figuring out like what the hell are all your biases? What are the things that you're struggling with? And I think of Black men especially, and how masculinity and patriarchy is so fragile, right? And so I really think it takes folks to really look within themselves. And that's the only thing that I fear. Like, as we, continue to have these conversations about Black Lives Matter, that, some folks may put themselves on a pedestal and be like, hey, like, yes, Black Lives Matter, I'm Black, I don't have any work to do. It's white folks that have work that they have to do, or non-Black people that have, work that they have to do. When it's like, oh girl, like, we all have work that we have to do. And it has to start within our own communities so that we can uplift each other, so that we can empower each other, that we can support each other. And so, yeah, I think it starts inward. Folks really have to look at all the social constructions, all the bullshit that we've been taught, and really begin to break that stuff down and be like, why am I so attached to this idea? Why do I want to show up in the world this way? Why do I want to, and I think about masculinity, which is actually, I mean, it's really homoerotic. Like looking at, like trying to get approval from other men that you're worth something, or like, that's actually pretty homoerotic. So I think folks have to really look at the social construction that have been created and begin to question these things. Now is the time to question stuff. And folks really need to dig deep within themselves and look at the things that they're attached to and let some of that shit go.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else want to chime in on that one?
Yeah, I'd just say, I think, part of it could be expanding the dialogue to not just racial justice, but just justice as a broad universal truth. And that means different things for different people. One of the things that I've been doing is whenever I've had a lot of friends come to me recently and say, hey, I'm trying to unpack this dynamic. I don't really understand sort of how Blacks are feeling and what I can do. One of the first things I do them is send them implicit bias training. So Harvard has really good training where you can test for different implicit biases, whether it's gender, sexual orientation, race, and we all have our stuff, right? Like it may not, for me, it may not be racial, it may be gender, it may be sexual orientation. Maybe age. So I think like race is just one of many facets for which we really need to open up this discussion and really get a sense for like, what does that sort of universal justice and inequality and rights really look like?
Yeah. Other folks?
I feel like we have to challenge the folks that have the loudest mic and the largest platforms, right? And I keep coming back to like the Breakfast Club. I used to like them, and then
don't get me started, Sean. Don't get me started.
Y'all wasn't gonna go there, so I had to.
Oh, yeah.
But I used to like them, and then I watched how they perpetuate these stereotypes, right? And it's almost like they get joy out of amplifying these stereotypes, even though they understand that they promote violence, right? And I think it's going to come down to us, like challenging not just those platforms, but those spaces that allow those platforms to exist, and then showing up. Like when one of us is murdered, regardless of who the one of us is, we all need to show up with the same force, and we need to challenge other people to show up as well. And we need to create these safe spaces that for folks that don't feel comfortable showing up, that we understand other ways in which we can change the narrative. This guy is killing me in this car. He's killing me in this car. But figuring out ways that we can show up. I think it needs to be this concise messaging, right? That I'm gonna kill him. That all of us can speak to, because the messaging has to change. We all have to be saying the same thing and understanding why we're saying it, and then challenging others to say it as well.
Absolutely. Maurice, Jeff, anything you want to add to that question before I take panel from the audience?
Yeah, I struggle with it because I feel like maybe I'm not doing it the right way when I try, or when we have these discussions. I've always defaulted to trying to draw parallels between the racism that you experience, as a Black man, to maybe the homophobia or transphobia that somebody else experienced. And it's like where I always end up is like, yeah, I get the racism, but like, nah, the other stuff is like, nah, just nah. And I'm like, I just don't understand how you're not seeing this, how you're not seeing just the similarities here. So I mean, I'm certainly open to tips, because I'm more than willing to have the conversations. I struggle getting through, and it gets frustrating to the point where you're like, do I even try with this person? Should I bark up a different tree? But then that just that also just feels like giving up, and it's exactly what you shouldn't be doing. That's sort of the only thing that I would add there.
Gotcha. Maurice?
Yeah, and I'll quickly add, I typically have the conversation and I approach it first, do no harm. You don't have to understand the plight of another community in terms within the Black kind of population. But first of all, don't get in the way of another subpopulation or community's progress. Let's just start there on the very basic thing. Okay, so what? You're ignorant. Come along for the ride. There's nothing wrong with learning and also advocating at the same time. You don't have to do one before the other. So when I'm talking to my Black peers about, yes, Blackness is important, but there's other things happening, the way I would show up for my Black females on reproduction rights or something like of that nature, I can still show up for you as a Black person and also show up for you as a female as well when we're talking about reproduction rights. It's not that I'm going to say, why are you worried about this when we have the Blackness that we need to worry about first? So you can definitely focus on different issues that are salient to other communities while still focusing on being Black. Because as Chris highlighted earlier, intersectionality is messy, and we're often going after the same goal depending on what the topic is or the issue is at hand. So some of these communities and some of these identities are trying to achieve the same thing, and trying to separate them out is actually counterproductive. But when I'm having these conversations, once again, it's just do no harm, and then you can also learn along the way.
Absolutely. You know, the framework that you just presented, Maurice, is one that I present all the time in trainings, is that, yeah, I identify as gay and Black, and I live and I navigate the world through racism and through homophobia, but I can't ignore the male privilege that I also experience as well. Like those things, you know, don't go away because you're Black and gay. And similarly, my experience, the baby, and then similarly, you know, my experience with male privilege doesn't erase the whole racism and the homophobia. But I think that people think that it's either one or the other. It's either if I acknowledge that I have this privilege, then I can't, then, you know, it erases the fact that I also struggle. It's like, no, like all those things take place in the exact same space and time, but we had to acknowledge all of them. I want to go through some of the questions in our Q&A box. For some time during this conversation, I shouldn't have read that out loud. How do I, as a Latina, support my Black male students, college level? How do I coach my white colleagues to do so as well? Anyone can jump in on that. How do I, as a Latina, support my Black male students at the college level? This person is in higher ed. And how do I coach my white colleagues to do so as well?
Well, so I mean, I'll speak on it because I am in higher education, and I work a lot with college students. What I would first recommend in terms of supporting your Black male students is reaching out to them and understanding what their needs are, what their concerns are. I think having that conversation in a very meaningful way without putting the onus of them to tell you what they need, but you can still have the conversation trying to understand what their needs are, and then rally the troops, whether it's administration, faculty members, to start adding those resources and services. For the second part of that, in terms of getting your white counterparts to care, that is a challenge, I will admit, because I face this on the daily. It is a struggle. What I can do is, once again, try to draw similarities. If they can stop to care about, for lack of better words, Karen's issues as, you know, a white woman who's struggling in this particular course, or, you know, she can't do this on campus, they can stop and put the same amount of effort and energy into a student of color and understanding what their issues are. Because the same amount of time that they've taken to listen to Karen's issues, they can also allocate some time to a Black male issue or a Black trans issue, whatever the case may be. So once again, I think your white counterparts is kind of harder to kind of train them and want them to change their ways. But I do it all the time in staff meetings. Like, you see that energy that we're giving to Karen? Let's shift it on over here to Daryl, right?
Hello. Come on now.
Yes.
And I will say, if you have agendas, I know not all offices or staffs worked with agendas, but if there's agenda, go ahead and throw that on the agenda saying, hey, we're discussing students' issues. I don't see anything about Black student issues. I don't see anything about students of color issues. Can we get that under new business? And you know, in future meetings, it will be old business and continue to be old business until it's addressed. So it could be one of those agenda items that is forever ongoing, and you talk about it every time you meet. So it's a little bit more commonplace, and you actually are supporting your students for the long term.
What I heard you say, Maurice, was one, stop, ask questions, listen to the answers, right? Like one of the questions I love asking people is not necessarily how are you or what can I do to help, but it's what does support look like for you? In this moment with what we're dealing with, what does support look like? What do you need that would be most helpful for you in this moment? And allowing folks to really give you sort of like, what is it that they're in need of at that moment? And then what I also heard you say too is that whenever we keep focusing on the white folks around this issue, how do we be relentless in our pivot towards the most marginalized individuals and how it's impacting them?
Absolutely.
Now, I'll add one piece to that, because I think it's also important for folks to do some reading, like educate yourself on the various issues. Because goddamn it, sometimes we tired, and I don't feel like I don't want to tell you my struggles. Like, child, I'm living this shit every day. I don't want to have to tell you what my struggles are, and so I don't want to talk about race today. Like, so like I think it's also a certain level of accountability that folks have to dive into the work, volunteer, dive into the community, experience, like help. Like
Get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Level of folks have to do some of that work themselves and not expect us to tell you how we want to be treated. I think it's a certain level of I think it's important to ask questions, yes, but I do think that there needs to be a certain level of accountability that you hold to yourself to learn the research. There's research out there. People are telling their stories. Like, there's information out there. So I would encourage folks to read up, get learned up.
Yeah, that actually leads us into one of the other questions that our audience member had. I've had a few conversations around the balance between amplifying Black voices and speaking up as allies. How do you all find that balance between ensuring the voices of impacted communities are front and center and not placing the burden of speaking up solely on those members, on the members of the impacted community? And Sean, do you want to start with you?
I just want to say I love Chris. Thank you for letting them know that they should do some research and reading on their own, and that it's not our responsibility to tell them how to show up or what should happen. At this point, it's about them also doing some research and learning themselves and relearning, if you will. I really struggle with the word ally now, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's overused, and I think folks will tell you that they're an ally, and really what they want is your platform or the positioning that you're in, so they can sway folks towards whatever it is that they want to do. I think a true ally allows you the opportunity to tell your story and your narrative, and they don't try to direct it one way or another. So I think true allyship means that you're going to give me an opportunity to kind of figure out what should happen next. Or if I already know what should happen next, you're going to give me the space and opportunity to move that forward. I think anything else does it a disservice because it's not genuine, in my opinion. And I'm not speaking as the executive director of Destination Tomorrow, so don't inbox me or call me about this. I'm just saying that a true ally will allow me the space and opportunity to utilize the platforms that you have and utilize your privilege, recognizing that you have a certain level of privilege and you're in spaces that I could never access, and allowing me those spaces.
Blake, I want to pivot to you. What are your thoughts about the balance between centering marginalized voices, but also not laying the emotional labor of teaching on top of them as well?
Yeah, I guess that question, as I understood it, is the premise is there's a little bit of a conflict between me sort of speaking up and seeking knowledge and making sure that the voices of the disempowered, whoever that is leading the movement, continue to do so. I don't necessarily think there's a conflict per se. I think to Sean's point, it's more about as long as you're amplifying a message that is created and owned by those people that are sort of broadcasting that message, I think you're good. I don't think there's necessarily a conflict there. Like, I think as long as you own it, I think as long as you're open, you're transparent, and again, you're amplifying a message, not bastardizing one or changing it for your own, for your own ends, whether it's just to look good on Instagram. I think that can be, that in and of itself is fine, and there's really no conflict there.
Yeah. Jeff, thoughts there?
Yeah, I think back to my mom, right? And probably all of us probably experienced this growing up with a parent. It was like, I only want to have to say it once, right? So if I'm thinking of a group, say there's 3 of us there, I'm the only Black one. There's 3 of us, I've said it to you once before. Maybe what I would appreciate if the 3rd person asked the question and you're just like, hey Jeff, do you mind if I try giving it a shot to answer this? And then hey, if I feel like, no, you know what, I'm going to speak, I'll let you know, but I'd appreciate your attempt. You told it to me once, now I'm going to sort of take this and run with it.
So what I hear you saying is like checking in with folks and saying like, you want me to jump in there and get this, and giving an opportunity to use our own voice before we necessarily jump in and try to be the one to explain it. Anybody want to add anything else to that question?
I'll add a little piece. I've also struggled with the word ally. I feel like it's overused. I don't feel like folks know what that means anymore. And so I was doing a training once, and I switched it up on them. I was like, I ain't going to say ally. I'm going to say accomplice, and I'm going to see how they respond to this. And I had a woman, say, oh, I don't like the term accomplice because it seems incriminating. And I was like, well, girl, what do you think our lives are? Like we are policed every damn day. So imagine you're just struggling with a word. Imagine living that shit every damn day, girl, and not being able to take that stuff off. And so I think, and I like the word accomplice because it's like you have to get down in the trenches. You gotta get dirty. You gotta get messy. All right. You have to leverage your privilege, right? You may lose some shit, girl. You may lose stuff.
That's one of the things I posted on Facebook the other day was that, before white people or straight people, whatever the majority group is, can begin to unpack what they can do for the movement, you've got to ask yourself, am I ready to lose family? Am I ready to lose friends? Am I ready to have people who I once thought was my circle ostracize me because I choose to talk about Black Lives Matter and Trans Lives Matter and things of that sort? Because that's what will happen. And that is what happens to many of us when our white friends or our straight friends or our cis friends get, quote unquote, tired of hearing about it. They walk away from us. And it's like, all right, you self-choose yourself out, but you've got to be ready to lose something in order to really have skin in the game, if you will, right? I think that's really, really critical. One thing that I want to do before we wrap up, let me ask you one question because I think it's actually really critical. There's a question around, what are your feelings about large companies making statements on the movement? And how can we hold companies? I'm gonna take like two of y'all on this one because this one might be right. How do we? Sorry, I lost it for a second there. How can we hold companies accountable for saying they support a cause on a deeper level? So I think Sean, you mentioned this, or it might have been Chris. Like, everybody changes the logo to Pride to the Pride flag, but then right back after on July 1, we right back to business as usual. How do we hold these businesses accountable who want our money but don't, want to support us?
I'm gonna be real quick. I just have to add. So like I've seen a lot of companies where they put Black Lives Matter on their little logo. You get up on Amazon, Black Lives Matter. Netflix got a little section of like Black movies and stuff. I'm like, oh, this is cute. But what's your board looking like? What's your board of trustees looking like? Is it colorful? All right. What's the do you have supportive services and for the Black folks in your companies? Are you listening to them about their experience as they're working, right? So I think it's all about those things. What is the structure of your company and how are Black folks and Black voices, Black stories, Black narrative infused in all that shit? So that's I'll put that.
Okay.
Can I add to that a little bit?
And I think
go ahead, Sean. Sorry.
If you can spend $50,000 on a float to come down Fifth Avenue, then you can turn around and at least give $25,000 of that to a Black and brown LGBT or Black Lives Matter movement. But what are you truly supporting? I want to see who you support, and then I will completely understand if you're with me the other 364 days.
Go ahead, Jeff.
The thing that I would add there is, I'm thinking back to what Chris said around like, what's your board look like? And, and I've seen a lot on like, I'm in sales, so I stroll LinkedIn all the time looking for business. And I've seen a whole lot of like, what percentage of your company are Black? How many Black people are in leadership? And I see that and it grinds my gears. And here's why. It grinds my gears because Black people can absolutely and have absolutely upheld institutions of racism. So I don't think it's enough to just say, what's your board look like? I love what Chris said about, support services. How are you actually supporting people? Personally, and don't take this to offense, Cornell, I think diversity and inclusion is a misnomer, because diversity does not equal inclusion. And I think we get lost in this mindset of like, if we just get blacker or browner or, more LGBTQIA, then, we're good. And that's just not the case. You might actually be creating systems where people are cannibalizing each other, just trying to get ahead. So, what do your support services look like? How are you really supporting communities? How are you allowing them to be themselves and bring their whole selves to work every day? That's sort of what I want to see.
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree with that. And with that said, I want to thank you all for being here. I do want to note that we did have a sponsor for this episode who helped pay for, we
Girl, get the
sponsored up. We sponsored up. Who helped cover the transcription service, the capping services that we weren't able to use. But Dr. Brandon Barrow is an empowerment and gender identity workshop facilitator, and is also the owner of Queerly Empowered, a bookstore for queer-friendly gifts, books, and gear. When I post this to YouTube, I'll put their information in the notes that you can reach out to them. But thank you so much, Brandon, for providing the funds to support that effort. And any other businesses that are out there that are looking to support and sponsor an episode, I am gladly welcome to take it. But thank you to our panelists who joined us for an awesome, lively conversation. I really appreciate y'all joining me last minute, because I know I came to y'all last minute with this, but I really appreciate you. Thank you for folks who are watching. Thank you for your questions, and stay tuned for June 23rd. Same time, we'll be unpacking the same topic with Black women and understanding how their lived experiences in relation to Black Lives Matter and racism, things of that sort. So thank you once again. Have a great weekend and be safe.